The morning mist hung thick over the Norman hedgerows on July 12, 1944, turning the landscape into a grey-green maze that swallowed sound. At 0620 hours, Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski stood in the motor pool, grease already darkening his knuckles from an hour wrestling with a stubborn fuel pump. He watched Corporal Danny Ortiz climb into the driver's seat of an unarmed Willys MB Jeep, 2,160 pounds of stamped steel, canvas top and painted drab green. Danny grinned, still carrying the fatigue from last night's poker game. 5 miles there, 5 back, Mike. I'll bring you real coffee this time, not that motor oil they're calling breakfast. His hands moved over the steering wheel with the casual confidence of a man who'd driven this route 4 times already, someone who believed morning supply runs were the war's safest job. Mike pulled a bent wrench from his pocket, the same one that had saved them both when a fuel line ruptured outside Carrington, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. Keep your head down anyway, and bring back sugar if they've got it. Danny caught the wrench and tucked it into his jacket. You worry too much, Sarge. Germans are 10 miles east, chasing their own tails. The Jeep's engine coughed to life, that familiar 4-cylinder rattle every GI knew by heart. Danny lifted 2 fingers in a lazy salute and guided the Willys through the motor pool gate, disappearing into the mist like a boat pushing off into fog. The engine sound faded. Then it was gone. Mike returned to the fuel pump. 20 minutes later, the distant crack of small arms fire rolled across the hedgerows, thin and sharp, like someone snapping kindling 2 miles away. The motor pool went quiet. Wrenches stopped turning. Men looked up from engine blocks and transmissions, listening to the silence that followed. No explosions, no sustained firefight, just a brief rattle of Mauser fire, then nothing. Corporal Hayes muttered what everyone was thinking. That's the supply route. The Jeep limped back into view at 0652. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks radiating from a single bullet hole. Coolant streamed from the radiator in a hissing arc, leaving a dark trail in the dirt. But Danny was alive, grinning even. Blood painting the left side of his face from a scalp graze that looked worse than it was. He killed the engine and half fell out of the driver's seat, legs unsteady but voice strong. German patrol tried to pin us at the crossroads. 3 of them, maybe 4. We floored it, hit 60 on the straightaway. He laughed, wild and relieved. Outran the bastards. The radiator took rounds, but we made it. Relief flooded through the motor pool like a physical wave. Mike grabbed Danny's shoulder, felt the warmth of living muscle beneath the blood-soaked jacket. Hayes slapped Danny's back. Someone started joking about putting racing stripes on supply Jeeps. For 30 seconds, they believed in luck again. Then Danny coughed, once, a wet, surprised sound. His knees buckled. Mike caught him as he collapsed, lowering him to the dirt. That's when Mike saw the hole in the seat back, small, neat, punched through the canvas and padding at an upward angle. A 7.92mm Mauser round, fired from low ground, had entered Danny's lower back and traveled up through his chest cavity without an exit wound. Danny's eyes went wide, not with pain. There wasn't time for pain. But with the stunned disbelief of a man who'd already survived, who'd made it back, who'd been 30 seconds from safety. He tried to speak, blood filled his mouth instead of words. Mike pressed his hands against the entry wound, even though he knew it was pointless, even though the medic was already running across the motor pool and wouldn't arrive in time. Danny's pulse stuttered beneath Mike's fingers, then stopped. The medic arrived, checked for vitals, and shook his head. The motor pool fell silent except for the hiss of coolant still dripping from the Jeep's punctured radiator. Mike stared at the Willys MB, at the canvas top that wouldn't stop a thrown rock, at the thin steel body that could be punctured by rifle fire, at the complete absence of anything resembling armor or armament. 2,160 pounds of transportation sent into combat zones where men with guns waited in hedgerows. A toy, the Germans called them Spielzeug, toys, and they hunted them like field mice. That afternoon, Mike walked to the scrap heap behind the motor pool and dragged out a Browning M1919 machine gun salvaged from a wrecked half-track. He didn't ask permission, he didn't file paperwork, he just started welding. Captain Hendricks found Mike after lights out, guided by the blue-white flare of the welding torch cutting through darkness. The M1989 sat mounted on a reinforced pedestal, welded to the Jeep's rear frame, angled 15 degrees forward to counter muzzle climb. Mike had stripped the weapon down to components, cleaned each piece, and reassembled it with the methodical precision of a man converting grief into engineering. Hendricks watched the sparks cascade off the frame for a long moment before speaking. "Kowalski, that weapon's not authorized for light vehicles. You know that." Mike didn't look up from his welding torch, didn't pause the bead he was laying along the reinforcement strut. "Neither was losing Danny, sir." The captain studied the modification, the cross-member bracing, the ammunition box mounted within arm's reach, the traverse mechanism that would let a gunner track targets through a 180-degree arc. Hendricks had lost 17 men in the past month to ambushes that American doctrine said shouldn't happen this far behind the front lines. Doctrine didn't account for German desperation or the Bocage's 10,000 hiding places. "I didn't see this," Hendricks finally said, "but if it works, I'll need 8 more by next week." 2 miles east, Gefreiter Hans Becker sat in a farmhouse cellar with his squad, passing around the last of a French farmer's hidden wine. They'd been joking about the morning's encounter, the American Jeep that had tried to outrun rifle fire like a panicked rabbit. "Did you see that little Spielzeug bouncing over the ruts?" Private Weber laughed, still high on adrenaline from his first combat action. "Like a mechanical mouse." I almost felt sorry for them. The others joined in, relief expressing itself as mockery. They'd fired 30 rounds at a moving target and scored 1 meaningful hit, poor accuracy that would shame them in calmer circumstances. But this morning felt like victory. Hans said nothing. He was looking at the dried blood on Weber's tunic, where a ricocheting 30 caliber round had torn fabric without breaking skin. The Americans had returned fire from that Jeep, brief, wild, inaccurate, but present. Mice didn't shoot back. "They're learning," Hans muttered, but the wine and laughter drowned him out. He thought of his own workshop in Hamburg, the lathe he'd operated for 12 years before the Wehrmacht decided machinists made adequate infantry. Americans were machinists too. Eventually they'd stop running and start adapting. 6 days later, on July 18th, Private First Class Jimmy Reed volunteered to drive the modified Jeep. The morning was clear and hot, the kind of weather that made metal too painful to touch and turned helmets into ovens. Mike rode in the passenger seat, one hand resting on the M1919's grips, feeling the weapon's weight distribution through the frame beneath him. Their orders were simple: scout the road to Sainte-Mère-Église, observe and report enemy movement, avoid engagement. Standard reconnaissance doctrine written by men who'd never driven an unarmed vehicle through Bocage country, where every bend offered perfect ambush geometry. At mile marker 7, they spotted a German supply truck, an Opel Blitz 3-ton, stopped on the shoulder with 3 soldiers changing a tire. Their rifles leaned against the truck bed, 10 feet away from their hands, the universal posture of men who believed themselves safe. Jimmy slowed the Jeep to 20 miles per hour. "We call it in," Mike said. His jaw tightened. He thought of Danny bleeding out in the dirt, of that 30-second gap between survival and death, of every unarmed American vehicle that had limped back, shot full of holes, or hadn't come back at all. "No, we do it." Jimmy swung the Jeep wide, dropping speed to 15 for stability. Mike opened fire at 80 yards, short, controlled bursts of 6 to 9 rounds each, the way the manual specified for the M1909's 550 rounds per minute cycle rate. He walked the tracers into the truck's engine block, watching metal spark and puncture. The Opel's fuel tank erupted in a rolling orange fireball. Gasoline, not diesel, a supply corps error that turned a disabled truck into a funeral pyre. The German soldiers scattered into the hedgerows, rifles abandoned, running for their lives rather than their weapons. Mike ceased fire. No point in killing men who'd already quit the fight. Jimmy floored the accelerator. The Willys hit 55 miles per hour on the straightaway, wind screaming through the frame, gone around the next bend in 30 seconds. By the time any German reinforcements arrived, they'd be 2 miles away and invisible in the maze of farm roads threading through Bocage country. Back at base, word spread like wildfire through canvas and rumor. Kowalski put a gun on a jeep. It worked. By 1400 hours, 5 more volunteers had asked Mike when he'd arm their vehicles. By August the 3rd, Mike had armed 8 jeeps, 2 with Browning M250 caliber machine guns that fired 800 rounds per minute of 50 caliber ammunition effective to 2,000 yards, and 6 with the lighter 30 caliber M1919s. The math was brutal and beautiful. Each jeep now carried the sustained firepower of an entire infantry platoon. Compressed into a platform that could sprint at 65 miles per hour and vanish into terrain where half-tracks couldn't follow. The test came at 0730 hours in heavy fog that turned the world grey and depthless. A critical supply convoy, 18 trucks carrying fuel, ammunition and rations for 5,000 men, had to reach a bridgehead before nightfall or the advance would stall. 4 of Mike's armed jeeps were assigned as outriders. Jimmy drove the lead jeep. His hands relaxed on the wheel, despite the weight of the 50 caliber mounted 6 feet behind his head. Mike manned the gun, scanning the fog-blurred hedgerows through iron sights that caught condensation and made everything look like ghosts. At kilometer 14, the fog lifted like a curtain being drawn. The German ambush materialized 400 yards ahead, a Marder 3 tank destroyer with a 75mm gun and 3.5 inches of sloped armor, plus 20 infantry emerging from the tree line in textbook skirmish formation. The convoy's lead truck hit its brakes. Radio chatter exploded into panicked fragments. Contact front, armor. Mike didn't wait for orders or permission or tactical doctrine to catch up with reality. Jimmy, hard left now. The jeep broke formation at 45 miles per hour, racing perpendicular to the Marder's firing axis, while the German gunner tried to track them through optics designed for targets that moved predictably. Too slow. Mike unleashed the 50 caliber in sustained bursts, 100 rounds in 7 seconds. The recoil drove through the reinforced frame he'd welded as a tribute to Danny. His shots didn't target the tank's armor plating. Instead, he fired at the vision ports and the exposed soldiers fanning out across the ground for their assault. 2 German troops fell to the ground. The remaining soldiers bolted for the drainage ditches. Their offensive collapsed before gaining any momentum. Jeeps 2 and 3 swept to the right flank. Their 30 caliber machine guns poured intersecting streams of fire into the wooded area, transforming shelter into a death trap. The Marder's turret rotated back and forth, attempting to track 3 fast-moving targets that refused to cooperate the way German crews had grown accustomed to slow American vehicles behaving. The 75mm cannon erupted with a concussive blast that rattled teeth and obliterated a stone wall 20 feet from Jeep 2. Yet the shell simply whistled through empty space and crumbled masonry. Corporal Hayes gripped the steering wheel of Jeep 4, executing a wide, sweeping maneuver that positioned him behind the Marder at a position German military theory claimed armored vehicles couldn't defend against. He unleashed his 50 caliber weapon directly into the engine compartment, 200 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition that ricocheted, punctured, and compromised the cooling system. Dense smoke billowed from the tank's ventilation openings. The engine sputtered, locked up, went silent. 35 tons of steel immobilized by a vehicle 1/16 its mass. The German soldiers pulled back into the woods, carrying their injured, retreating from their established positions without another coordinated volley. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The convoy advanced with American casualties at 0. That evening, division headquarters transmitted official instructions through proper military channels for the first time. Field modifications to reconnaissance vehicles receive formal authorization. Material requests should proceed through standard supply procedures. Mike was handed a commendation on genuine paper instead of the mimeographed sheets they usually received. Jimmy received his corporal chevrons from Captain Hendricks personally. The motor pool gathered for genuine coffee, chocolate that hadn't turned into liquid, liberated from a captured German storage facility, and endless banter about Kowalski's killers that left Mike feeling strange and unsettled. For that one magical evening, they felt convinced they could solve this puzzle. American innovation and welding equipment could overcome German military advantage. Small, agile vehicles could withstand encounters with massive armored opponents. Perhaps everyone would actually return home alive. 200 miles to the east, Hans Becker received details of the convoy ambush from a shaking lieutenant describing the sequence. 20 men lost the position, lost the tank, lost their confidence. The officer repeated those figures obsessively, like someone struggling with math that refuses to add up correctly. Hans showed no contempt. Sufficient warfare had taught him to recognize when something essential had fundamentally altered. Writing by candlelight that night, his diary held new words. The Americans no longer follow our playbook. They transform modest equipment into lethal tools. Show them respect. German military intelligence responded faster than American overconfidence could match. Oberst Friedrich Stern, regimental commanding officer, bearing 30 years of Prussian military academy training in his calculating mind, reviewed the captured field reports and interrogation transcripts like a chess master analyzing an opponent's patterns. The Americans had engineered something innovative. Excellent. Innovation generates patterns. Patterns establish predictability. Predictability breeds vulnerability. On August 9th, at 3:30 in the morning, Stern positioned Hans Becker's platoon near a fraudulent supply depot. Wooden boxes, stenciled with fuel markings and amateur painting, arranged as if a quartermaster's mistake sat waiting for discovery. A solo motorcycle dispatch rider was sent through American lines at sunrise, proceeding at a calculated pace to guarantee observation, carrying nothing beyond outdated intelligence reports. The trap was spring-loaded when Mike, Jimmy, and 2 additional armed vehicles accepted the assignment at 11:30 under brilliant sunlight, offering zero concealment and complete visibility. Their instructions were straightforward: locate and intercept the courier, examine any military resources located, transmit intelligence. Vague direction of this variety gave aggressive fighting men justification for nearly whatever they chose. They discovered the motorcycle abandoned at the 3rd-kilometer mark, motor still radiating warmth, dripping fluid into the dust. The supply depot stretched ahead 200 meters through an unobstructed expanse, clearly visible, completely accessible, suspiciously perfect. Jimmy's knuckles bleached white, gripping the steering wheel. Something about this doesn't feel right, Sarge, like the table got set, then abandoned. Mike raised his field glasses toward the tree line, searching for indicators of German positions. Shadows that lacked natural cause, angles contradicting the landscape, light glancing off scope lenses. The view revealed only hedgerows and dense summer growth. Possibly legitimate. Kraut's column pulled back in that sector last week. Could have left equipment behind. He grasped the radio equipment. We report this first, then proceed with extreme caution. Static answered. Heavy, intentional, the variety indicating sophisticated jamming equipment and deliberate action. Mike's insides twisted sharply. Reverse immediately, now. The universe erupted in violence before Jimmy completed shifting gears. 8 German 80mm mortar batteries released coordinated fire from concealed positions. Their firing teams had calculated this location during daylight hours. Mortar shells, 15 per minute from each tube, fell with mechanical accuracy into patterns, converting the open terrain into a lattice of explosions and fragmentation zones. Jeep 3 absorbed a direct impact. The 50 caliber ammunition ignited violently, creating a secondary detonation, spraying flaming fragments skyward, resembling pyrotechnics. Both soldiers died instantaneously. Identification became impossible once the flames subsided. Then, machine guns erupted from 3 directions, 1,200 rounds per minute from each weapon, operating at double the firing rate of American models, establishing overlapping zones that converted escape into death and forward movement into slaughter. Jeep 2 reversed into a concealed pit trap that Stern's engineers had excavated the previous evening and rolled sideways. The operator fractured his cervical spine during the tumble. The machine gunner emerged shrieking, bones protruding through skin at unnatural angles. Jimmy pushed their Jeep toward the solitary opening in the kill zone, a narrow farm track appearing to offer escape because Stern had intentionally kept it accessible, anticipating terrified men would flee toward any potential route. Mike maintained suppressive fire with his 50 caliber, sustained bursts draining his ammunition container in 40 seconds. generating noise signifying nothing meaningful. The Germans occupied fortified, camouflaged positions protected by arrangement and temporal advantage. Bullets struck the Jeep's steel body like metalworking strikes. The windshield fractured into glassy fragments. Jimmy received a glancing round along his left side, searing pain blooming immediately, blood flowing freely. His fingers gripped the wheel regardless, combat conditioning overcoming shock. They covered 200 yards before the engine stalled, radiator penetrated, coolant flooding everywhere, temperature reading climbing into dangerous territory. The Jeep coasted behind momentum before halting beside a destroyed agricultural building. 4 soldiers dead, 3 vehicles eliminated. The field advancement that appeared invincible merely 6 days earlier now seemed arrogant, inscribed in biological fluid and charred metal. Hans observed through his scope as the Americans sheltered behind the structure. He experienced no satisfaction, merely the confirmed recognition of someone who'd anticipated precisely this outcome, and derived no happiness from accuracy. They learned aggression, now they learned suffering. He commanded his platoon to maintain current positions, abandon pursuit. Executing cornered men in a hole produced nothing except additional grieving relatives. Yet recruit Weber, barely 20 and still convinced victory was attainable, raised his rifle toward the farmstead. Hans seized the weapon and forced it downward. "Hold your fire, they are finished." Weber's expression showed embarrassment and bewilderment, unable to comprehend why compassion held significance with the opposition trapped. Time stretched heavy and strange while they held position behind the barn. Jimmy's wound had halted its bleeding, not a significant artery, thankfully, merely torn muscle tissue causing excruciating sensation, yet lacking fatal potential. Mike emptied his canteen, irrigating the injury, then ripped canvas sheeting from the Jeep's damaged covering and wrapped it with sufficient tightness to make Jimmy grunt. Speech remained minimal. Distant battle sounds drifted across the landscape, artillery rumbling northward like summer storms, anguished voices disappearing eastward, scattered gunfire originating too far distant to pose immediate danger. Eventually, Mike broke through the quiet. Danny would have rejected this assignment as foolish from moment one. Jimmy managed a painful grimace. Danny would have positioned the firearm vertically purely for rebellion, calling it revolutionary accuracy while pretending he'd originated the concept. Their laughter came quietly, fragile, evaporating within moments into heavier stillness, as recognition settled that 4 companions had stopped laughing permanently. The .50 caliber hung uselessly on its bracket, ammunition spent, becoming 700 pounds of inert steel, lacking fuel to justify its existence. Hans approached the barn unaccompanied. His rifle held at a casual angle invisible to his subordinates. His squad protested urgently, "Officer, it is dangerous," yet he dismissed them with the quiet certainty of someone who'd endured 3 major campaigns through recognizing defeated combatants versus threatening ones. These 2 were broken. Their silence conveyed this plainly. He proceeded around the corner. Mike wheeled, revolver trembling in his hands. Hans displayed open palms, communicating in halting English acquired from a dockside worker years before war commenced. "You carry injury. Leave this place. We do not execute injured men." Mike maintained the weapon aimed downward. His response emerged more forceful than genuine feeling. For what reason? Hans observed the destroyed vehicle, the improvised gun installation displaying welding craftsmanship and desperate innovation. The bloodstains documenting men attempting something courageous and suffering consequences. You transform modest equipment into lethal instruments. This requires intellect, skill, not military discipline. Worker, builder. He gestured to Mike's palms, calloused and scarred. Grease still ingrained despite field conditions. Before warfare, I also worked with machines. Hamburg, machines and precision, quiet hung suspended between them. 2 individuals recognizing metal's directional qualities and breaking limitations. Understanding that manufacturing represented communication exceeding national boundaries. That combat had converted toolmakers into mutual killers rather than constructing beneficial items. Hans stepped aside. "You possess 60 minutes. The forward aid station lies 4 kilometers westward. Depart now, preceding my commanding officer's arrival requiring enforced execution for military procedures." Jimmy rasped through clenched teeth. This represents deception. Mike examined Hans's countenance carefully, exhaustion marking the space surrounding his pupils, the burden of numerous slain adolescents bending his posture, the noticeable absence of murderous intent from someone capable of issuing a termination order and concluding the matter. I believe him. Hans rotated to depart, then hesitated. Your companion, the initial one, the supplies transport. Acceptance of my regret. Warfare destroys us all. He retreated toward his line without responding expectation, refusing backward glances. Mike and Jimmy progressed westward, supporting mutual body weight. Jimmy's undamaged arm encircling Mike's shoulder, Mike carrying most of the burden. They avoided discussing Hans. They avoided discussing the 4 soldiers lying in the open region behind them. Certain weight exceeded vocabulary capacity while traversing distance, relying on chemical stimulation and remaining existence. They encountered American positions at 15 to 30 hours. Medics swarmed Jimmy, placing him on transport despite insistence regarding independent mobility. Mike collapsed against a half-tracked vehicle. His physiology stopped cooperating. Only afterward did he permit the delayed trembling that accompanies 30 minutes of mortality, followed by unexpected survival. 21 days accumulated indistinctly involving paperwork and corrosive remorse. August 25th saw Paris liberation. By August 30th, Mike re-entered the maintenance facility, observing 40 vehicles bearing official weapon systems, 50 caliber models, 30 caliber variants, experimental M18 recoilless cannons capable of penetrating light armor at considerable distance. Military records attributed Kowalski's innovations in written documentation, transforming heroism into bureaucratic notation.